The first Evil Dead, we were very connected to it. It was Bart Pierce and Tom Sullivan doing stop motion and gore effects in his basement for 3 months. Evil Dead 2, things were happening more at the same time.
Clearly the makeup effects was on a whole nother scale. And I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to try the stop motion thing.
They had me set up a room for Tom Sullivan to work in. He was coming to do some of the animation shots in the Book of the Dead props and things, and the dagger. And so I got that room set up, and Tom was the first effects person to show up.
So I got to work, and I had tons to do. I did the opening with the book coming in. It was written by the Dark Ones. And I'd built a stop-motion animation book. It had the pages in it, and the stop-motion book had wooden covers, and the covers were hinged and also had ball and socket joints so that I could animate those. And each page had 2 pieces of paper over aluminum wire so that I could animate the paper flipping back and forth. There's a shot of the book being written, and for that I hand drew I think the first 4 or 6 pages, and then I would ink it in, do a little bit, and then click a frame and stand back and do a little bit more and click a frame. Then Sam wanted the pages to turn as each page was completed, but to accelerate. So the next 4 or 6 pages, I had the artwork already done and cut out, and I would just glue it on with contact cement, take a frame, glue another picture down, go pop, 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 flip. And then the last of the pages were already hand-drawn. The whole book was hand-illustrated. I needed a cameraman for the stop motion, and they got Larry Larson, an experienced animator, and he had this beautiful 35mm Mitchell camera. And for you film fans out there, that's what Ray Harryhausen used. So that was really cool.
Larry had to leave on a family emergency, and that left me and Tom. So here I was, an 18-year-old kid, and I ended up photographing some of Tom's animation, which ended up being the opening of the film with the ghosts flying out of the vortex.
I had made 2 round 4-foot diameter vortexes, put them on a big Lazy Susan, and would spin them and take the brush and just drive it to the outside, and then you'd get like a real easy made vortex.
Originally, the film was going to open with a recap of the first Evil Dead, which it still kind of does, but it kind of doesn't too. But originally there was going to be some recaps of the meltdowns and things, and there was a half-scale sculpture of Sam Raimi who was going to be playing Scotty.
And I think it got too expensive, so they just kind of tossed it out and recondensed it.
We did end up shooting the book burning in the fireplace, but I think that was the only shot for the recap sequence that we filmed.
I know for a fact that I recommended Doug Beswick for the Dancing Linda. And it was clearly an element where the wider shots would have to be stop motion, because we can't have a dummy or an actress with a head removed dancing in full shots.
The choreographer, Tam Warner, designed a dance sequence. We photographed that dance sequence on 35mm film, and we sent this raw 35mm footage to Sam Raimi, and Sam cut together the dance sequence. Basically, the scene was completely built in live action first. They sent me the cut footage, and then we went to work matching that up, basically frame by frame. And then I had a crew building the miniature set. The supervisor there was Jim Belahovic.
When Doug Beswick called me up to work on Evil Dead 2, I had already worked on Aliens, The Thing, so my skills were starting to get more refined. My direct job when Doug Beswick hired me was to build what we call the cabin set. So I had to build this cabin and trees that, for an animation setup, were going to be a challenge, because if Doug would reach into the set, nothing could move.
The animation was very challenging because this was, actually trying to duplicate a performance. So it was a bit challenging in that respect, and it was all tabletop. So it's a pretty slow process. I would say I probably got maybe a frame every 5 minutes, That would be at the peak where you're working your fastest. So it's very slow and tedious. And there's no going back. You know, if you make a mistake, you basically have to start over.
My job on the film when it started was just to do the crawling hand scene, or scenes. And I did fly down there to do the one long shot because we had no way to duplicate that entire room. And the rest of them were done on a miniature, not a miniature, but a rebuilt set to match a small section of the real set. And all the other cuts were done in my studio. I basically had to match the paint job, get the armature made, get that set in the mold right, do the foam cast, and then took it down on set for them to approve. Basically, I just stood around most of the day and watched everybody else shoot scenes and had a good time. And then once they shut down for the day, somewhere around midnight, I went in and shot for about 3 hours to do the hand crawling across the room. And then after we did that, they just had so many effects on the film that Sam or Rob said, could you help us out with some other shots? And that turned into the neck growing and head changing transformation scene and a couple other scenes of the bust of Henrietta lunging at the camera, and then the full body puppet with Ash swinging the chainsaw and stuff, a couple of stop motion cuts of that. So it turned into more than initially was supposed to be.
A lot of the stuff that Tom and I were dealing with were, there were things like the Henrietta head coming up out of the floor.
Mike Tersick did the sculpture, and at that point, they hadn't put Ted Raimi in the Henrietta makeup yet. So he sculpted it so it looked just like the actress who was playing Henrietta as a human, but she doesn't look anything like Ted Raimi as Henrietta, as a Deadite. And so there's that little jarring thing, but it's also so quick you don't notice.
We spent an entire, probably a 5 or 6 hour night on set while everything was clear, with Bruce just doing the sequence where he sees the evil for the first time incarnated in the flesh, and the flowers die in the flower pot behind him and his hair streaks white. And we had built a rig that held Bruce steady so that Tom could animate the white streak in his hair. And we had a propane torch that we would intermittently hit the flowers with in the flower pot so they would slowly wilt and fall over as the shot progressed. Animation just has a great look that you can't beat, and there's just something really weird about it when you start doing it with real people.
Sam wanted a great scene at the finale of a flying deadite attacking a bunch of knights. Well, they had a big, long sequence. It was like a real Harryhausen battle with a monster sequence where it was going to fly in and attack 20 or so knights on horseback and knock a couple of them off their horses, and then spot a woman running with a child, and it would fly at him, and that's when Ash would show up and with a shotgun and blow its head apart.
For the exploding head, the original idea was glass plates with paintings, basically. So it was going to be a series of paintings of the head exploding. For reference, Tom decided we'll sculpt some little heads on cantaloupes and we'll take them out in a field, and I'll set up my Super 8 camera and film it, and we'll shoot them with a shotgun. I think I shot the first head. Tom sets it up, and we load up the shotgun again, and he shoots the second head, and the kickback sends the lever for cracking the barrel open deep into his hand. And as I recall, he needed 6 stitches after that.
I'm not sure what happened exactly, but Sam decided he didn't want his special effects guys on the set, which I found to be really ominous. So when we saw the footage, of course, it wasn't usable, and there were only a couple of shots that were, and that's what became of the sequence. It goes by so fast, most people can't even remember it. But that was going to be my ticket to greater adventure in stop motion. What a heartbreaker.
Looking back at working on Evil Dead 2 it was a good time, and it was a magical time working with animators who I wish we could have continued working on animated films like that.
In retrospect, I would say that it was one of the most interesting projects, fun projects to work on because it seemed to have a, a real creative energy about it. That with, building everything was kind of hands-on back then.
I'd love to see stop motion sequences back in features. It was fantastic, and it was not perfectly real, but it was wonderfully real, if you know what I mean. And those creatures, if you gave them the time and the import on the film and didn't cut away to mechanicals and just let the animation creature be the star, I think they were very powerful.
I thought it was neat that it turned into a stop motion film. I love stop motion, and there's just something cool about the way it looks, and I think it works really well for fantasy and would work well for Lovecraft and things like that. I'm also glad that I'm kind of the guy who introduced Sam Raimi to stop motion animation, so I was very happy with that.